Thanks, Bronwyn, and thank you for co-authoring such a fantastic and seminal report. It's ironic that you've actually introduced me to talk about a report that you wrote. I assume that most of you have heard the expression consistency is key. Well, for me, national consistency is key, particularly as far as BCR is concerned. So what I want to talk today about is the BCR and how it's going to affect you as a building surveyor or someone in the building surveying profession. And I know things are tough out there at the moment, and I know change is difficult at any time, let alone this time. But what I want to do is sort of explain to you why we think change is necessary and what changes we think are necessary. Interestingly, government commissioned this report about 3 years ago, and it's taken a bit of time to get the momentum up, but we're well into the swing of things now. And the recommendations, the 24 of them that Bronwyn and Peter made at the time, are just as relevant today as they were at the time that they made them. Government has made some sort of headway into changing systems in response to the report, but there's still a long way to go. So as Bronwyn said, my role is about developing a national response to these recommendations. And I think just that move in itself, not having each jurisdiction or each state and territory go away and trying to implement their own changes, is trying to do it in a more coordinated national approach. A lot of you would have seen some of the work that we've already released, many discussion papers, most recently on the need for independent third-party review, mandatory inspections, and also a national registration framework for building practitioners. There's many others that are due to be released soon, and all of this work is actually due to be finished by the end of December, at which point it becomes the responsibility of the states and territories to adopt those models or introduce those models into their own legislation. A couple of people have said to me, so what's the impact of BCR going to be on me? And I usually have two answers. And the first answer is it's going to be significant and there's big benefits. My second answer is not at all, because the report doesn't change anything. What changes things is government's actions, and the support of industry. So we need those two things to happen. Otherwise, it'll just be another report. It's great that government is working together on this, and another example of where they've done it in the past is on the Building Code of Australia, and many of you will know it's been around for 25 years. And imagine if we had 8 different building codes still operating, and the likes of AIBS trying to advise on the 8 different codes in 8 different states. So, we've already got runs on the board, and I think that gives us some insight as to what we can do with our regulation at a state and territory level in future if we can start moving towards a more integrated or consistent system. I know that governments want to maintain some flexibility. They keep telling me this, but at the same time, we've got practitioners that are operating across borders. We've got products that are national. They don't produce them on a state-by-state basis, and it's a national industry. We are operating as a national industry, and I'll talk about insurance quickly a bit later and what it means for them. There's approximately 4 models of private building surveying across the country. It's not just private building surveying as one model. Every time there's a problem, people say to me, Matt, private building surveying, it's not working, it's got to go back to council. My response is, no, it's not that private certification's not working, it's the system that supports private certification that needs to be fixed. So for me, I think that's where we need to leverage off BCR. I just need to move on to the next slide. Moment. So just as a very brief background context to the report, all governments have supported the recommendations, so they're not still deciding whether they support it or not. Even Victoria has supported these recommendations. But where this report came from, it was commissioned in response to concerns around building quality, particularly around defects. And if you turn your mind to Lacrosse or Mascot or Opal, or there's loads of other examples of where they haven't made the press. So there's a history of non-compliance. We wanted to know the size of the problem. We talk about non-compliance, but what does it mean? How big is it? And when I talk non-compliance, I'm not talking chip tiles, bad paint jobs. We're talking about major defects. And we undertook a piece of work, and it says each year there's $2.5 billion worth of defects as a result of NCC and state and territory regulatory non-compliance. So that is a really, really big number. The major defects, they relate to things like weatherproofing, waterproofing, structural defects. So they're big ones, and they take a long time to surface. Interestingly, $1.5 billion of those defects relate to Class 2 buildings. And I think that may be underestimated because of the boom that we've seen with Class 2 buildings, but it's a staggering number, 1.5 as opposed to 2.5. And we know some of the reasons why this happens, but it's allowed us to concentrate on how we put forward some of the solutions to bring this $2.5 billion per annum of defects down. And where we've really landed is that it needs to be fixed at the start of the process. It's not the end. And this is where the building surveying profession is going to be called on to assist in updating this process. Here you'll see this is my take on Bronwyn's report. And what I've tried to do is broadly categorise it into 6 topics that I think, or 6 headings that really impact the building surveying profession. And this is the starting point for how we resolve some of these issues we've identified. But firstly, what it shows and what it actually says in the Building Confidence Report is that it's a full system. It's an ecosystem, and you can't pick and choose. We can't only focus on education without focusing on registration and compliance and enforcement. We need to look at everything. And I think the words are in the report. It's a coherent package of 24 recommendations. Interestingly, I think it's Corey from the Insurance Council is speaking next. And about 18 months ago, I met with the Insurance Council before we started this process. And I said, what do we need to do to fix the problem? Particularly the problem, I think at the time it was more focused on professional indemnity insurance. And the answer I got from ICA was that there's no one silver bullet. There's no one thing that you can do to fix the problems in the industry, to fix all those defects or to fix PI insurance. We need to look at the whole system holistically. There's no picking winners. So interestingly, I'm going to meet with the Insurance Council towards the end of this week, and we're going to check in to see how things are going. And although we've made some progress, it's been minimal, and you will have seen that with things like PI, it hasn't changed. The system, I'll just move on to the next slide. As you can see here, there's interdependencies, there's cross linkages, everything ties in together. So it's not as simple as from registration to education. But for me, looking at the next one, there's 2 particular topics that stand out, and they're fundamental to fixing the system, and that's data and education. Education is where we need to start. It's not about being a start and an end, it's ongoing. It includes CPD. The education, it needs to be informed by current practice. It needs to be informed by auditing. It needs to be informed by data, and it needs to be nationally based and consistent. So there's no use offering education at a state or territory level. We need to think more national. Education at this point, we can see courses are not sustainable, and they need to be reviewed consistently and be kept up to date. So as I said earlier, the National Registration Framework focuses on education, focuses on national education for each of those practitioners involved. The other one's data. It's the most central and powerful reform. We need to collect more data, we need to store more data, and we need to act on more data. And the building surveyors are the ones that are going to have to ensure that the data is complete and it's accurate to inform that education. So where next for building surveying? In terms of the BCR, the first thing is the consistent registration requirements nationally. Automatic mutual recognition is something that governments are looking at now. They've agreed to do it. So more and more, if you're going to move between different jurisdictions, you need nationally consistent registration. Mandatory CPD, as I said, education, it's not static, it's ongoing. CPD needs to be informed by auditing and compliance activities, data, and it needs to include NCC, and it needs to be all practitioners. So we'll be recommending CPD for everybody. Improved building design and acceptance process. My view is building surveyors take on too much liability at this point. So that's why the others in the process, they need to be registered, and there needs to be accountability around what they do. Mandatory third-party design and review. I know in Victoria currently it's not mandatory. I think it should be. particularly where they are complex designs in terms of structural and fire. If they're not mandatory, it's the lowest price. Do I have to do it under regulations? No, you don't. It doesn't get done. Same with increased mandatory inspections. When I was in the industry 15 years ago, there was a lot more inspections undertaken and there was a lot more detail. I think we need to start moving back to oversighting the work that we're approving more. Integrity and enforcement. This is about ensuring those people in the process recognise they're there on behalf of government. They have a role on behalf of government and they have a role in terms of keeping the community safe. So it's looking at what integrity processes we can put in place around appointment, around enforcement, and when the building surveyor must report that to governments. Governments is probably the last one I want to mention, and that's about being proactive in their auditing. If governments are proactive, it'll produce the data for the education and will help ensure that the legislation that is in place is working. Very last slide. I know I'm out of time. Coming back to consistency is key. Governments need to aim for this national consistency. I know we won't hit it on all occasions, but it's where we need to aim. Building surveyors, you have a big role in this process. We need to bring that $2.5 billion down in defects, and with that, we'll return confidence to the building industry. Thank you.